This is NEAF Talks. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the hardest working MC in the cosmos, Vincent Coulihan.
Hey, thank you. All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you. So our next speaker will be done virtually due to the fact that he could not travel under doctor's orders, but he will be done virtually. Fred Haise is a retired NASA astronaut, a former Marine Corps fighter pilot, and a United States Air Force test pilot. He was one of 19 astronauts selected in 1966. He served as the backup lunar module pilot for Apollos 8 and 11, and was the lunar module pilot for Apollo 13. We know, a lot of us know what happened with Apollo 13, the mission that was headed for the Far Morrow area of the moon. 2 days into the mission, the oxygen tank ruptured, leading to a near tragedy in space. Fortunately, by the teamwork of both those in the Apollo lunar/command module and the folks back at Johnson Space Center, we successfully brought back those astronauts safely, which was truly a remarkable success. With Fred, we have Bill Moore. He's an author and journalist and is a historian. He's authored several books, including Retrofire and Never Panic Early, an Apollo astronaut's journey, and is on the board of directors of the Stafford Air and Space Museum in Oklahoma. Moderating this will be Andy, and we will be welcoming them very virtually. So at this point, I'd like Andy to come out to the stage. Okay. And Fred and Bill are on.
All right, fantastic.
Welcome. Okay.
Thanks for joining us today, ladies and gentlemen. Again, Bill Moore and Fred Haise.
Hi, Andy. Hi.
Hey, Fredo.
Hey, Andy.
Hi there. Okay, you're live from Houston, and I guess Bill is live from Oklahoma. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, great. Okay, I want to make sure you guys can hear me all right. Okay, thanks for joining us today. Of course, we'd like to talk about your book some, and it was written during the pandemic. I mean, talk about challenging times. What kind of influence did the pandemic have on you writing the book?
I don't think the pandemic bothered me, at least, in what I had to do in coordinating with Bill with the Smithsonian to get the book done. Obviously, it affected a lot of other things in our lives, but I don't think it had anything to do with getting the book finished.
It's one way it helped, Fred, was you were such a busy guy traveling to Europe and other places that when the pandemic shut us down, you were at home where I could get in touch with you.
It helped, actually, in that sense, true.
That is amazing. A lot of people say that, yeah. Well, actually, I got the first question for you, Bill, is that you've had this passion for space exploration and aviation since you were young. How did that all come about?
Well, I was 12 years old when a certain magic mission, Apollo 8, happened. And just captured my imagination, kind of coming of age. And that night, watching Christmas Eve, as they were orbiting the moon, showing us live scenes from outside the command module and reading from the opening verses of Genesis, kind of, my hairs stand up in my arms right now thinking about it. It was a magic moment.
And Fred, of course, you grew up in Biloxi, Mississippi, and in your book you talk about how World War II had an influence on the town you lived on in your military career. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, it actually what directly affected my career change from being thought to be becoming a journalist through, in high school I got interested and continued through 2 years of college, was the Korean War, not World War II. And I decided to serve in the only service I could get into to become an officer, which was what my dad encouraged me to do, was the Naval Aviation Cadet Program, which obviously would involve flying airplanes. And I had never been in an airplane in my life, not even sitting in one on the ground. So at 18 years old, I signed up. And of course, what happened is I enjoyed and loved flying from the first day I flew, and decided that's changed my career. So somehow the rest of my life and career was going to be involved with aviation. There was no space program at the time. So that was a right turn in my career path that led to eventually getting involved in Apollo.
You also were a Marine fighter pilot, and you were also a test pilot, and you know, that's basically you're on the right track to becoming an astronaut. But I understand that Neil Armstrong visited Edwards Air Force Base, correct me if I'm wrong, while you were there after his Gemini mission, and I was wondering if he had an influence on you applying to the astronaut program.
Yes, in a way. I started as a test pilot, actually, not introduction set Air Force. I was actually a NASA test pilot, which we call ourselves research pilots, at Lewis Research Center in Cleveland, now named after John Glenn, and moved to Flight Research Center, you mentioned, at Edwards, which is now named Armstrong after Neil. And Neil started the same way. He started at Lewis, and he then went to Edwards, got to fly the X-15, which I didn't, before going into the astronaut program. And he visited back home at FRC one day, and Don Melick, another pilot, and I talked to him and kind of asked him, what's it like being an astronaut, Neil? And his response kind of set me back a little bit thinking about it, because he said, well, he said, you sit in a lot of meetings, you sit in a simulator lots and lots of hours, and there's no good flying. And of course, he was talking about our experience flying almost every day, involved in several research programs at the same time back at NASA FRC. And so it really didn't hype me up to immediately become an astronaut, but I looked over my situation, and I'd hoped to fly the X-15, which is really the last spacecraft that's been manually flown the entire profile, through launch, over the top, and entry. It's the last manned aircraft that's been flown that way. You know, in a rocket, you're just a rider and hoping that you don't have to abort. And so I really hoped to get into that program, but realized our office kind of operated by seniority within your time in the office. And I was about 2 down the line, and thought I'd never get to fly the X-15 before the program ended. So that's what encouraged me. If I'm gonna get higher and faster, the way to do it is in the astronaut program. And actually thinking about it, going to the moon sounds pretty exciting.
Yeah, that would sound pretty exciting to me as well, yeah. And of course, you were on the backup crew of Apollo 8 and 11, and I believe 16. But I think what most people don't realize is that you're on the background, you're on the backup crew, and you were trained just as if there was a failure or someone couldn't go on that flight. And I think it was you, Buzz Aldrin, and Neil Armstrong on 8. Is that correct?
Buzz and I were actually filled into an opening that had resulted in Mike Collins having a medical problem, and he got moved off that. He would have flown 8, and he got moved out of the alignment, and Jim Lovell moved up. So Jim ended up flying on 8, and that opened up a spot for me. So that was I was the first one in my group to get a crew assignment as the lunar module pilot on 8 with Neil and Buzz.
And Andy, if I could, before you go too much further away from his test pilot years, you might have Fred talk about his experiences with Chuck Yeager and how he was invited as a NASA research pilot to enroll in the test pilot program. And he got to do something that non-military people don't really get to do.
Well, what he's talking about is I had had a chance to fly Chuck on a chase mission to observe one of the launches of the first lightweight lifting body We were flying a program of vehicles, and it ended up being four version 5 of the vehicles ultimately flew with rocket engines, but were without wings. They were called lifting bodies. And Chuck was due to fly the first one we built, which was a lightweight version, which was towed behind a DC-3, basically. It was an Air Force C-47. And so I took him on a flight in a T-37 aircraft to show him how the flow would go through that launch, to that launch point. And on the way down, the only way in the T-37 you could keep sort of in alignment with the M2 F1, it was called, and it's a steep dive to the landing, was just before separation. I knew I'd shut off one engine, put speed brakes out, and put landing gear down, and at the release, shut off the second engine. So I had both engines shut down, and then still was overtaking the M2 and had to do barrel rolls around it a couple of times to create drag enough to back up, in essence, and fly alongside the lightweight, and landed without ever starting the engines, and had enough energy to roll over to the ramp that went up by NASA's hangar, and parked in the same spot I had left without ever starting the engines. And that impressed Chuck. I think that's why he later offered me to go into the Aerospace Test Pilot School, ARPS it was called, and at the time, and I was the first civilian to ever go into that school. And interestingly, Chuck had not officiated it till they got to go on a trip to, we're going on a trip to Europe. And I told Chuck that, you know, since I wasn't officially in the class, I'd just go back down to NASA and wait till they got back. And he just casually said, no, it's about time I told those people in the Pentagon you were in the school. So, so I got to go through the 1 year in the ARPS Air Force Test Pilot School during that time.
I also understand, of course, you're a lunar module pilot, and I understand that you spent quite a bit of time here at Grumman on the development of the lunar module.
That was my first assignment after the rookie training, which went on about the first 7 or 8 months. And I was assigned to Jim McDivitt, Ed Mitchell, and I, and a system engineer named Dave Ballard. And we went in to see Jim McDivitt. He was slated to fly the first LEM and test it in orbit, LEM 3, LEM 2 at the time, actually. And we went to his office, and Jim had very simple orders to Ed and I. He said, I want you all to go to Grumman and make sure I got a good LEM to fly. So that was it. That was the total instructions. So I spent the next 14 months, most of it at Grumman, testing not just LEM. It turned out LEM 2 got pushed aside because after the fire where we lost the crew on the launch pad, there was severe wiring constraints imposed. And LEM 2 was so far along, we'd have had to strip it to start over almost. So we jumped to LEM 3 to be the first one in orbit. LEM 2 was then made a backup for the LEM 1 unmanned flight, with the thought that the wiring, taking a risk with the wiring wouldn't be that bad if it was just a backup unmanned vehicle. So that's how LEM 2 ended up in the Smithsonian in Washington. But at any rate, that was my first assignment, and I did spend, incredibly, the Grumman reflected the workload and schedule pressure throughout the program, when in the book I describe in 1967, test operations, testing lunar modules, getting ready to get shipped to Kennedy, went 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We only planned one shutdown that entire year, Christmas Day. And that was pretty much the way it was if you'd gone to North American with the command module, or subcontractors who were struggling to meet delivery schedules with their components. And that was pretty much across the program at that time, trying to meet the schedule to land on the moon by the end of the decade.
Well, I have to say, I've known you for quite some time, Fred, and you always have a smile on your face, but when I see you at a Grumman event here at the Cradle Aviation Museum, I always see a bigger smile. So I know you spent quite a bit of time here. I guess would like to talk about Apollo 13. I'm sure everybody's really interested in Apollo 13. lots of 13s if you're superstitious on the mission. Of course, Apollo 13, and I guess it was launched on the 11th of April at 13:13 Central Time, and the explosion was on, I believe, the 13th of April. But who's superstitious, right? The mission, I understand, was going well for a couple of days. You were going to do a live broadcast back to Earth, and that was the first time that was done from the module, right, from the command module?
Right.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Right, we did a show and tell kind of thing from the lunar module, yeah.
Oh, from lunar module, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And it so happened, the timing of that, when Jim Lovell ended the program and signed off, if that program had been 30 minutes longer, we would have been on live TV when the explosion happened. Because they called, at that time, they called Jack Swigert to stir the cryos, and we had the big bang. And I think we had a very interesting couple hours after that, trying to get things settled down, to get the LEM powered up. Did quite a bit of troubleshooting for almost an hour in the command module before ourselves and Mission Control had run out of ideas, and went to get the lunar module powered up as a survival, have communications and environmental system to live off, and propulsion availability till things slowly got figured out as we went down the road from there.
How long did it take before you just figured out the whole problem, from the time that the explosion to the time you realized that, hey, we're not going to land on the moon?
Within the 1 minute after I drifted up from the lunar module into the command module and looked at the instrument panel, from several readings, it was clear we had lost oxygen tank 2. Without reference in mission rules, I knew that constituted an abort. And so I just was sort of half sick to my stomach at that time. I'd trained to go fly through 2 missions, and now was my big chance. And I knew we would not even go in the lunar orbit, much less try to land on the moon.
Yeah. At that point, what was the decision made to to slingshot around the moon instead of turning back? Why was the decision made to go around the moon, come back, instead of just turning around and coming back?
Well, that was made by obviously a meeting of the some of the flight directors. By that time, Glenn Lundy had come in and joined Gene Kranz, and Chris Kraft and others counseled, and so they made that decision. That rather than try to use the SPS engine, the big engine on the command module, where we really didn't know the total damage at the time, they would elect to buy time, really, to work things out by changing the path to go around the moon.
So at this point, when was it decided that you would use the lunar module as your lifeboat?
Well, that was decided that probably about a little over 50 minutes after the explosion, and that was kind of the point of the end of the troubleshooting. That's when Jim and I left the command module, left Jack alone, and we went to power up the lunar module. So we were already on that new path, really after a little over 50 minutes after the explosion, to live off the lunar module, whatever we're gonna have to do to get home over the next 4 days.
And I'm sure that power and water and things like that were certainly the things that you were very dear about, as far as how much you had left. And so what was your biggest challenge, as far as was it power, was it food, was it water?
No, the oxygen was never a problem. We had lots of oxygen with just the tankage and the descent and the ascent stage of the LEM. Plus, we had 2 full backpacks that we're going to use for our EVAs. And each backpack had a 6,000 PSI emergency oxygen bottle in case you had a slow leak in the spacesuit while you're out on EVA to get you back in. Each of those was about 1 day's worth. And so oxygen was not a problem. Water was only a problem mainly for cooling whatever equipment we had on, which lived off cold plates, electronics. and not for drinking. That was never a problem. The biggest problem was electrical, because the LEM only had batteries, 4 in the descent stage, 2 in the ascent stage. And the ascent stage batteries were smaller. So that was a critical commodity. And Jim, after the first maneuver we did using the landing engine on the LEM, the one we landed with, to put us on the path to go around the moon, he asked me to compute consumables, which I did manually on using a cue card and burn card, we called it. And figured at the time, we would run out of water probably a few hours before the planned entry, which was 150 something hours at that time. But I'd make it on the batteries, and I assumed the power down to about 18 amps on the 30-volt system. And I wasn't worried about the water, because on Apollo 11, we'd asked Neil and Buzz to shut off the water valve on their LEM, and we watched the equipment die. And the first critical equipment, if anything, died at about 8 hours. And I figured I'd run out at about 5. So I said, maybe I got some pad there even. But then we did the second maneuver after passing the moon that cut 10 hours off the return. So that made us even a little fatter on consumables and reserve.
Yeah, I understand that you, I think this came from Mission Control, but there was a little magic played here. You had the lithium hydroxide cartridges that didn't fit. They fit in the command module, but not into the lunar module for you.
That was something at least I wasn't even aware of. That was a pending problem. The ground Mission Control on their readings picked that up quicker and had people going to work on that, particularly Ed Smiley's group. Crew Systems group, and he led that division, and Bill and Seven at Johnson. And they fabricated a canister, a prototype, and tested it actually in a chamber. They happened to have a small chamber that had the LEM system in it. And they put that device in there, hooked it up, and actually impregnated the chamber with a lot of CO2 and verified that it would work. And before they then had to write meticulous step-by-step procedure to pass up to us to fabricate. And I was not involved, actually. I was off duty at the time. Jim Lovell and Jack Schweigert actually built that canister fix, called it the mailbox, that did the job.
Yeah, I understand that it was duct tape, socks, and cardboard that was used to make the fix.
Correct. It was cardboard was really the hardbacks of books, checklists, and socks were used to plug the hole in the center of that square cartridge from the command module. In fact, 2 socks were pushed in there, and had cellophane material that was from clothing we had vacuum sealed, and it wasn't delicate material. You had to use scissors to cut it. So unlike the movie, it had me involved in ripping it. I was never involved even. But it was tough material. Again, the gray duct tape we had on board was used for that. Now, duct tape, incidentally, was primarily on board with the thought of cleaning the filters on the environmental system. And for dust and particles that may have evolved on the filter, you could rub that duct tape on it to clean it off. So that was one of the main reasons we had that on board.
Well, one of the, I think I might have forgotten to mention for our audience here is that what are the lithium hydroxide, what do they do to, their purpose was really important purpose, right? Is correct? As far as changing carbon dioxide back into oxygen?
Yeah, well, it got rid of the carbon dioxide. It had the lithium hydroxide material in the canisters, both the LEM one, which were round or cylindrical in shape, and the command module ones that as you pass air through it, would capture the carbon dioxide. And so it would cleanse the air. And like I said, we never had any physical effects, although it was inching up toward the red line in the cabin, but we never had any effects. And the cartridge, of course, did the job it was intended.
The temperatures in the lunar module, because I recall the temperature being very cold, you had told me.
That was a critical part of the mission, and that never has been covered very well, and certainly it was not available the kind of thing would have been covered in media in any way. You have to realize the command module, the mothership, that we had to completely shut down for 4 days, and the water tanks froze in that vehicle during that time. They were found still frozen when they recovered the capsule on board the aircraft carrier and inspected it. Water tanks were still frozen. And so the main thing is there was not a procedure to turn it on, to activate it, because nobody ever figured we'd have to activate the mothership in flight. And they did not pass that procedure up, which I'll have to say was a great job by many people that got it, first of all, written down. Then other astronauts, people tried it in simulators to redline it, I'm sure, several times, I was told, and get it right. That was a critical thing to have that procedure right, because it was something we had never done before. And obviously, if we're going to have to do something like that, we would have gone through that dozens of times in a simulator before the flight. But Jack and I, Jack copied it. They read it up to him at about 17 hours. 17 hours before we were going to enter the air, whistling in at 25,000 miles an hour. Because of the limited power in the capsule, command module, they were not going to allow us to start the power up till 2.5 hours before we hit the air. Primarily because the command module only had 3 small 44 amp hour entry batteries that were necessary to get us through entry for control, get the parachutes out, etc. And so they didn't want to use up any more of those batteries than they had to getting through that power up. So they delayed us to that time, and Jack and I went into the command module. Dark, it was dark, we had to have flashlights, and first noticed with water covered the instrument panel, all the instruments. So Jack got out 2 towels, and we each wiped off the instrument panel so we could see the meters. And we started into that checklist. The first step was to push in a bunch of circuit breakers that were on 2 panels, one on each side of the spacecraft. And Jack thought about it. He's again thinking of the Apollo 1 fire and all that water hanging around. He knew it was probably behind the panels as well, worried about electric shorts. So he said, I'll tell you what, he said, I'll give a call and we'll push in any row only 6 circuit breakers and stop and wait a little bit and see if we smell wiring insulation burning. So that's the way we went through getting all the circuit breakers in, and that went through. And we were saved, really, I'll have to say, we were saved by the Apollo 1 fire, because the accident investigation, one of the things done was that severe wiring protocol that was opposed, including hermetically sealing all the wiring at all the connectors. And so virtually we had a waterproof wire harness. Otherwise we wouldn't have made it from probably right there with electric short. So that went smoothly, and we shucked the limb not about 45 minutes before hitting the air. Sort of canted out and yaw sideways to make sure it got clear and didn't impact us during entry. And everything went fine. We had a little rain shower at the top of entry where some of that water started falling out as we hit the air. But otherwise it was what I'd call a perfect entry, pretty much tied, I think, for the second most accurate splashdown of the program.
Yeah, it's I wanted to mention about the temperature also that you had in both the lunar module and the command module before that.
Yeah, the limb was a little warmer because we did have some of the electronics on, and of course all 3 of us huddled in there most of the time, so we had our body warmth. But you know, obviously with the water tanks having frozen in the command module, it was sitting right at freezing or a little below. The limb was probably in the mid-30s to high 30s most of the time.
Bill, what were your recollections when this was all happening? I remember when I was pretty young at the time, but listening to the whole thing in the media. What do you recall at the time when you were listening to all this with the media?
Well, you know, one thing that I think everyone can relate to is the movie Apollo 13, and how gripping it was, and edge of the seat. The movie is, and seems like it's one of those movies you can watch anytime you're going through the channels and it's on. But honestly, the real deal was a lot more gripping, a lot more edge of the seat, because you didn't know from day to day. And of course, we had 3 different networks that covered it at the time, and each one had their own, spin on what was going on, and it was quite a time. I was like the crew. I was really upset that we weren't going to have a moon landing, and then of course it quickly turned to concern for their safety and getting them home. So it's a pretty special time. And when you talk about the movie Apollo 13, they got it right most of the time. It was a pretty accurate film, but Fred will tell you there are a few things they had to do. What did Ron Howard tell you, Fred? Something about it wasn't dramatic enough with the mission controller lingo that was going on.
They had to add some drama in here and there to humanize us.
Well, Jerry Griffin's here. I think he should really be doing this other than me, but he knows that well, much better than I did about the drama, of course. And
hi, Jerry.
The best thing maybe is to open up some questions for everybody. Anybody like to ask questions? Stand up and speak as loud as you can.
What did you do in your spare time when you were in the command module or lunar module?
What did you do in your spare time when you were in the command module or the lunar module when you were coming home?
Most of the time, it was the spacecraft. We never could get the so-called PTC, where you revolve it in like a barbecue mode to have it hot and cold alternately around the spacecraft. And we were just kind of slowly tumbling, if you will, in various directions. And occasionally you'd get a view of the sun, earth, or moon. And most time I was just looking out the window at views in between the next thing to do. The way we shifted for the first 2 days is I would be on alone, and Jim and Jack would then cycle that way. And then, of course, by then it really got chilled down slowly to the temperature I mentioned, the 30s. So we normally all 3 stayed in the LEM all the time. And another interesting side bit is Jack Swigert, the command module pilot, had never been in a LEM till that flight. He was like me at Grumman. He was spending his time at North American working the command and service module. He was the expert on that vehicle. And it was funny when this all happened and we left Jack to power down the command module alone and to power up the LEM. He showed up finally, and I noticed him behind me there. He perched down, came through the tunnel, and sitting back on the Asin engine cover, the engine that would have lifted us off the moon had we landed. And Jack's only comment was, he said, "Do you think this thing will make it?" I said, the LEM is a pretty fragile vehicle compared to the command module for the weight requirements. It had no inner wall. It had netting material that was up to keep you from bumping in to the wiring harnesses and to plumbing that you could see all around the vehicle. You could see through that netting. And it was loud. There was very little insulation, no insulation. So the pump sounds, the glycol pump, and then it had a habit of gurgling occasionally and changing frequency, whining. And the cabin fan was loud, so it was very noisy compared to the command module. So that made Jack nervous for a little bit, to worry if the lunar module was okay and it was going to keep running for a few days.
Another question? Okay.
When you landed on Earth, what were your thoughts? What were you thinking then?
When we splashed down, well, obviously very, very happy to make it back and grateful for what had been done, which was kind of out of the box, so to speak, thinking and working hard. And incidentally, many people I talked to, obviously, about what went on, found that many probably got less sleep than I did on board. With the timeline they were given by Gene or Glenn Lundy or one of the flight directors, Jerry Griffin, to come back to them with answers, they probably got less sleep than I did. Didn't even go home. I understand some of them just slept in mission control, even on the floor, to get things done when they got too tired to think straight, but not time enough to feel they had to go home.
Have one more, a couple here. Anybody can bring the mic over? Stand up, maybe it's easier. Who has the mics? I have one. I got one. Right here? There are a couple people right here?
You speak about the entire experience in a very calm and concise manner, and I know that, you know, there were things that had to be done and whatnot, but natural human instinct would have you, as I would think, being very frightened and questioning whether or not reentry would be successful. Can you describe how you felt at that time?
Well, I mean, the thought of whether you survive or not is before you go. Kind of even from fighter squadrons I was in the Marine Corps and in the Air Force, a normal thing was you had your best friend as a designee that would take care of your wife and family. And so one day you didn't get back. And it was the same way. I had Jerry Carr, who was a neighbor, a Marine, as I was, had been a former Marine, over to my house even to show him where paperwork was and that kind of thing. So he had the primary responsibility, if I didn't get back off Apollo 13, to be I call it the key person, at least worry about the administrative things for the wife and family. Of course, she'd have a lot of support from other astronaut wives and other astronauts that would be at the home, as they were throughout the flight, as well as NASA had a protocol officer there to handle anything needed. So that was just normal business, if you will, not just traveling in space, but it was in my career as a fighter pilot and as a test pilot for NASA.
Anybody here?
Correction, or was the mid-course correction as dramatic as shown in the movie?
No. We did two of those. There actually was one of those done on Apollo 9. It was one of their test objectives. They did the same manual maneuver. Now they used a different alignment way, but the actual burn itself and the control of the vehicle was done on Apollo 9. We had to align it a little differently. Jim used the COAS, which is your sighting, normally sight on stars or something. I call it, it's like a gun sight, out his left front window. And he could sight on the Earth, which was actually roughly a half Earth and the cusp of the Earth, and aligned on that, and then they would directed us this procedure, and then pitched up slowly. And I was looking through the AOT, the optical telescope, and the lunar module, and the upper point of view in that instrument was at 60 degrees up. And when I saw the sun just peer into that view of that instrument, I called Jim to stop the rate, the pitch rate. So he froze the vehicle in that point. Now at this time we had the abort guidance system up, which is a very smaller even than the command module system, which incidentally our big computer and the guidance nav and control system we had, a hand-wired core, was like 1/10 of a megabyte. I said megabyte, not gigabyte. And so the computer was smaller in the abort guidance system, so we could afford to briefly have it up. And we could issue one command that would give us 2 needles on our instrument in front of us, that if we kept those needles centered, controlling pitch, yaw, and roll, would hold us in that attitude that we'd just frozen at. And so that's what we used for controlling. And the way we did it was with 2 people. The configuration we were in with the limb still attached to the much heavier command module, we had to use the translation control left and right for roll control, and the translation control fore and aft for pitch control. And the little hand controller you normally use was only good for yaw, which went pretty much straight up through the axis of the 2 vehicles together. So when we started to burn, I would control pitch, pushing or pulling on the translation controller, and Jim would do roll using left-right commands. As it turned out from the data the ground collect afterwards, I looked at it and in a graph chart. We did not deviate much more than a degree in any axis. And of course, as you said, the movie had us about going out of control. The burns were very short. One was a little over 20 seconds using, I think, the descent engine. And the other one was 18 point something seconds using the 400-pound reaction control jets in one direction for that burn. So they were very short maneuvers.
Not like Tom Hanks in the movie.
Hi,
Yeah,
thank you.
That scene, some of that, Jim Lovell hugging me, my exaggerated throw up with space sickness. Jack and I arguing about who threw the switch, that kind of stuff. That was what he's called humanizing, because Ron told me he listened to all the air-to-ground transmissions that NASA had provided, and he said it didn't ever sound like you had a problem. So he said, I had to humanize you in some way. So that's with some of those things.
Anyone else? Any questions? Some people in the back.
Hi, thank you for talking to us. I was wondering, when you look back on the mission itself and its role in your life and the space program, would you choose to land on the moon, or would you choose to go through the whole ordeal if you were doing it again?
Oh, I'd like to land on the moon, obviously. Well, I have to tell people I've developed neuropathy in my feet, and I look kind of funny in my spacesuit trying to get around the moon with now my three-wheel walker I use quite a bit. I wouldn't quite have the right look.
What kind of lessons from Apollo 13 do you think could be learned by the the Artemis program coming up? And just what are your thoughts on Artemis 2 coming up? They're going to be repeating the free return trajectory on their mission, although it'll be a nominal part of their trajectory. They're not aiming to land on the moon, but yeah, your thoughts on these new upcoming moon missions.
I don't really have any thoughts about a direct thing that would apply that hadn't already been applied from the accident investigation they did on 13 on, follow-on spacecraft like Space Shuttle, et cetera. Their whole mission approach is different. We launched on one rocket and had both spacecraft aboard. I think their mission involves the launch of, not their launch, but the later landing missions involve several launches. They have this lunar orbiter that's a fairly large orbit around the moon, a stable orbit, I think 6 days. Around the moon, they have a service module effectively that's produced by a European Space Agency. So it's a totally different approach and the things involved to affect the landings. And part of it, I guess, came about because of the thought of eventually, hopefully, going to have a lunar base where they would be better suited to logistically support that situation. That kind of drove, I think, to the architecture they ended up with in this case, rather than ours, which was just to land, stay a short time, and collect samples and come home. So that directly, even the mission planning, it's a whole different ballgame. I have not been involved directly in NASA's technical shop. I do a lot of work with the education department for children and teacher events. But no, I'm glad to see they're going back. The first flight, some people complain it's not ambitious enough, but it's a build-up thing you try to do in testing. They're going to do a thorough systems test of certainly the capsule that's not been done, and as they did kind of on Apollo 7, to make sure it's in good shape, and the course that gets them out there, and the other propulsion systems involved to tweak the path and the trajectory to get them back to entry and through landing.
I might add a little bit of trivia here. Apollo 13 has had the record for that furthest point out in space when they made their loop around the moon headed back to Earth. All the other missions went into lunar orbit, so they didn't go as far. And they'll have that record until Artemis goes, and they'll go a little bit further out and break that record from 1970.
We have a youngster here who has a question.
What was it like when the mission started?
Oh, at launch?
At launch, yes.
I'll say one difference was I don't think I was excited as emotionally as I'd seen. I had been on the so-called closeout crew, one of Gunnar Vent's 6-person group who got the astronauts aboard and strapped in and ready to go and close the hatch and check the seal. I had done that for Apollo 8 and 11, so I was the last one out of the capsule. And both times I had to crawl underneath and come out from below to get out the hatch to close it before they left. And I could see they were really pumped up and ready to go on both 11 and 8 and 11. It was somewhat damped because we had done that crew changeout. We had worked with Ken Mattingly through the Apollo 11 back up, and now we're trained to go fly 13. And at the last minute, 2.5 days before launch, they pulled Ken off the mission because of the measles threat, and Jack Swigert replaced him. Incidentally, unlike the movie, we didn't fear Jack's ability to fly the mission. As I said, we trained equally. Prime and backup, you could have changed out a whole crew the week of launch and it wouldn't have mattered. The mission would have gone. But it was just sad to have, because mentally the two, and I had that experience as a backup, you get really excited with 4 or 5 weeks before launch. When you're the prime, you're now, man, I've got all this way and I've worked hard and I'm finally going to get to fly. And you see sometimes the booster lit up on the launch pad at night. So you're really hyped up and getting excited to go. And on the other hand, as a backup, at that time, I sort of mentally backing off from that thought, because I knew I'd have to just go watch somebody else fly, even though I'd done all the same work. So you kind of mentally back away. So that now is a flip-flop for those two people at that short time, 2.5 days before launch, to change those roles. And the same way I felt sad that Ken had been removed from the crew, not from worrying about a technical issue or worrying about performance on the mission. So that was one thing. The ride itself, the only describe it as unusual from my airplane flying, which I obviously had a lot under my belt at that time of many different types of aircraft and situations. The 4 engines on the Saturn V, the big engines, gimbal left and right, fore and aft, to control the rocket's path. The big engines, about 7.5 million pounds total, about 1.5 million each. And when they moved even a little bit, you got a lot of motion, feeling that motion up, because you were sitting way up on the top in the capsule, up at the top of that 360-something foot rocket. And particularly unusual was the left-right motion, because the couches were fastened in the overhead in the capsule, but had a little clearance on the side, because they were built to have you some cushioning on splashdown, or even if you had to make a land landing on an abort. And so they were allowed to move, and you got a lot of left to right, herky-jerky, I'll call it, motion when the rockets gimbaled in that direction. That was pronounced and quite different from anything in an airplane. Airplane I experienced, as most of you in the audience probably have that flown airliners, you get in the turbulent air and you get a lot of bouncing up and down. But you don't get too much left to right as motion swinging in the seat. And so that was what was most unusual. The G levels were modest compared to what I'd experienced in fighter airplanes, which even in my day were good for about a little over 7 Gs, and the first stage only got to 4.5. And modern fighters, of course, can pull up to 8 or 9 Gs. So, the G level wasn't that terrific.
Time for a couple more questions.
In the movie Apollo 13, during the live broadcast, it shows you turning the cabin repress valve. Is that something you guys did, and if so, what was that used for?
The cabin repress valve was kind of the closeout and a procedure you had for the LEM environmental system. And I can't describe physically why, but it made a bang sound. And I had done that, not in flight, but I had done that before in like a chamber test we did. And so that was what was referred to, and Jim was hoping at least that's what had happened that caused the explosion. As it turned out, I had not done that at that time, unfortunately. But that was just a thing that normally, if you were courteous, you would have warned people you were going to throw the valve, so they'd be ready to experience that and not think something was wrong.
Hi, I worked many years at Grumman, including the years that you were there, and we've crossed paths there. Many of the people, as you know, many of the engineers worked on Apollo when they were in their 20s and 30s. And when they were in their 40s and 50s, they looked back and said that was the highlight of their career. What's your opinion about your Apollo experience? Was that the highlight of the career, the years that followed? How would you rank things?
Well, I certainly say I feel blessed to have been around at the time. I was just thinking back to the last century. And if you think of what the greatest things to influence the US and the USA, at least our country, was the 2 world wars, obviously, and the 2 programs, development programs or exploration programs that stand out is the work that was done on the program to invent the atomic weapon and the Apollo program. Both were struggling with schedule pressure. Tremendous schedule pressure. And those stand out as the biggest things in that century. And I was just happy to think back now and say, wow, I was born at the right time and got to the right age with the right credentials and experience to be a part of it. As far as personally thinking of it as a test pilot, my greatest experience was the approach and landing test. Primarily because I left the astronaut office and spent 4 years in the orbiter project office in program management with Aaron Cohen, who's the project leader. And so I was very involved with the early design development for 4 years of orbiter specifically, which I had not been involved in design at all in Apollo. It was already designed and I was more in the vehicles being manufactured and ready to ship stage of that program. But I was there from day one on shuttle. And now after 4 years, I got to go back to the astronaut office and named to command Crew 1 with Gordon Fullerton, Joe Engle, and Dick Truly were Crew 2. So the 4 of us were going to fly an 8 test flight program where we're going to use the 747 carrier aircraft as our launch vehicle. That could get us up to a little over 25,000 feet at release point and do testing as a glider without engines on the way down to landings at Rogers Dry Lake at Edwards Air Force Base in California in 1977. So that first launch was I look back and say that was the greatest event of my experience in time as a test pilot. There was a lot of pressure on that flight. I was concerned because we had got to a point in the program where, number one, there were slips and delays, particularly in the orbital flight announced from problem with the tiles on Columbia. And a new president had arrived. Jimmy Carter had come in that January. The program was started under Richard Nixon, so it was his program, and we were concerned about how President Carter might feel about continuing and to what degree. And I was worried if I did something wrong and crashed Enterprise, that could end the shuttle program right there. because we did not have a backup vehicle. That was deleted for cost very early in the program. So as I climbed the ladder that morning to get aboard, that was reflected by the people on the ground who had managed to shoot a photo of people wearing blue suits like we were wearing and their helmet on, same helmet we were wearing, and with a visor down and oxygen mask hanging so you couldn't tell who the people were. They're sitting on this huge sweeper that sweeps big city streets. And the saying on a little card by the picture said, "If you screw this up, this is your next job." So the workers were worried about how this flight was going to go as well.
Time for another question or so. Anyone? Right here, maybe?
Sir, we're glad you came back safe and everything is good. Just one question. When you and your crew were on the dark side of the moon, the furthest human beings away from the planet, how lonely did it feel to be in the great big black of space by yourselves?
I didn't feel lonely at all. Jack Swigert and I had cameras out. We had film to burn. You know, we're going to have all that lunar orbit time that Command Module used those cameras. We had black and white cameras, Hasselblads, and color. And Jack and I were shooting pictures furiously of everything in that direction. We had a broader view of the surface on the backside. It was about a half. Incidentally, it's not the dark side of the moon unless it's a full moon. People think of always the dark side being dark. I think a lot of people in this audience know that's not quite true, but some people in the general public think that. So we had a half moon, and but from a higher altitude, we were about 132 miles up. Had a broader expanse to shoot pictures of. Shot very good pictures of Moscow and Tsiolkovsky on the backside. That our lunar trainer, Farouk Albaz, praised us after the flight for those pictures. I think he was trying to make us feel good that we'd done something good on the mission anyway. And so that's what we were busy doing. Now, Jim was not. He was severely disappointed. I can understand. That was Jim's second time to the moon. He had gone on 8, and now he was going to land on the moon, and it fell out for him. Now, I didn't know at the time, but hoped I'd get a second chance, which I thought it was when I trained 16, backed up John Young. I thought I was going to get to fly 19. But of course, within about 4 months in that training cycle, 18 and 19 were canceled. So I did not get my chance to go back.
Do we have time for one more? I'm sorry? Oh, okay. So, but I have to say one thing with Jerry here. Unlike the movie Apollo 13, there was more than one flight controller in mission control. They only showed one.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that explains why Jerry Griffin wasn't at our anniversary event night before last. I was at Gilroy Center with over 200 of his compatriots. Gene Kranz was there, Milt Winland was there. And so he missed seeing some of his old buddies along with me at that event at Johnson Space Center night before last. Great event.
We're glad to have him here, that's for sure. Yeah. Well, we're sorry that you couldn't make it, but thanks for being with us. And in closing, ladies and gentlemen, Bill Moore, author and American hero, Fred Haise.
Thank you. Enjoyed talking, everybody.
Thanks.